Picture this. A man walks into a room puffing his chest, talking loud, making sure everyone knows he's not to be messed with. Everyone notices him. Everyone remembers him. How cool is that? Right? Wrong. Niccolo Machiavelli, the master of power and strategy, calls this man a fool because he lacks courage, number, because he doesn't understand how real power works. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Here's the problem with acting tough. You don't attract strong allies. You attract users, enemies, and people waiting for you to fall. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. They're usually the most insecure. And if you try to act tough, Machiavelli has something for you. True power hides its claws. Real strength moves in silence. And the moment you feel the need to prove how strong you are, you've already lost the game. Walk through any gym, any office, any bar, and you'll see them. Men who've confused volume with authority, aggression with confidence, intimidation with respect. They talk louder than necessary. They take up more space than they need. They turn every conversation into a competition, every interaction into a test of dominance. And they think this makes them powerful. But Machiavelli thinks otherwise. These men are advertising their insecurity. They're broadcasting their fear. They're essentially holding up a sign that says, I need you to think I'm strong because I don't actually feel strong. And here's what they don't realize. Every person watching this display is making calculations. The smart ones are noting their weakness. The dangerous ones are planning how to exploit it. The valuable ones are walking away entirely. Why? Here's how Machiavelli explains this. He says it's in one of the delicate layers of human nature. They don't respect loud confidence. They respect quiet confidence. They don't fear obvious aggression. They fear unpredictable intelligence. They don't follow the person who demands leadership. They follow the person who demonstrates it. And this misunderstanding leads to the first catastrophic mistake. The tough guy escalates situations he can't actually handle. He writes checks his ability can't cash. He starts wars he can't win. Machiavelli had a rule about this. Never wage a war you can't win. But the modern tough guy violates this principle constantly. He gets aggressive with the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong place. He turns minor disagreements into major conflicts. He transforms manageable problems into life-destroying disasters. And when reality hits, it hits hard. Here's the truth that destroys most people who act tough. You can't control what happens after you escalate. That moment when you puff up, raise your voice, or step forward aggressively, you've just lit a fuse. And you have no idea how long it is or what it's connected to. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. A wise man does at once what a fool does last. The fool escalates first and thinks about consequences later. The wise man considers all possible outcomes before making a single move. But the tough guy operates on emotion, not strategy. He gets disrespected at work and immediately gets confrontational. He gets cut off in traffic and starts a road rage incident. He gets challenged at a bar and can't back down without feeling like he's lost face. And here's what he doesn't realize until it's too late. Every escalation is a roll of the dice where you can only lose. Best case scenario is nothing happens and you look foolish. Worst case is you encounter someone who actually is dangerous, connected, or smarter than you. Because here's the dark truth about real predators. They don't act tough. They don't need to. They move quietly, strike precisely, and disappear before you know what hits you. The person who actually has power doesn't advertise it. They don't need to prove themselves in random encounters with strangers. They don't need to win every verbal sparring match. They don't need to be the alpha in every room they enter. And this is where acting tough becomes genuinely dangerous. You invite retaliation from people who operate on an entirely different level. The quiet guy you disrespected turns out to be connected. The woman you were aggressive with turns out to have influence. The employee you bullied turns out to have evidence. Machiavelli called this the fortune of fools, temporary success through ignorance that inevitably leads to spectacular failure. The tough guy wins small battles but loses wars he doesn't even know he's fighting. And the worst part, everyone sees it coming except him. Because while he's focused on looking strong, everyone else is focused on actually being strategic. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But it is far better to be underestimated than overestimated. Machiavelli says that visibility equals vulnerability. The moment everyone knows your strength, they start planning around your weakness. But the tough guy does the opposite. He makes himself the most visible person in every situation. He ensures everyone notices his aggression, remembers his confrontations, and tracks his movements. And here's what happens when you become the visible target. You attract the attention of people who view you as a problem to be solved, not through direct confrontation, that's amateur hour, but through strategy, patience, and precision. The office tough guy becomes the focus of HR investigations. His aggressive emails get forwarded to management. His confrontational meetings get documented. His hostile behavior gets reported by multiple witnesses. Meanwhile, he thinks he's winning because people seem to defer to him. He doesn't realize they're building a case against him with every interaction. Machiavelli calls this the blindness of the tyrant, the inability to see that apparent submission often masks active resistance. That obvious respect often hides genuine contempt. That immediate compliance often precedes long-term revenge. And in the modern world, this plays out in devastating ways. The gym tough guy who intimidates everyone eventually encounters someone who actually fights professionally. The workplace bully who pushes everyone around eventually pushes someone with connections to upper management. The social media tough guy who talks trash online eventually encounters someone who can dox him, sue him, or destroy his reputation. Because here's what the tough guy never considers. In a world of cameras, recordings, social media, and legal consequences, every aggressive act becomes evidence. Every threatening statement becomes documentation. Every intimidating behavior becomes ammunition for your enemies. And everyone becomes your enemy when you make yourself a threat. People who might have been neutral become hostile. People who might have been allies become opponents. People who might have helped you become people who actively work against you. This is what Machiavelli meant by making yourself odious. When your presence becomes a problem that others need to solve. When your behavior becomes a threat that others need to neutralize. When your attitude becomes a challenge that others need to meet. And the solution is never what the tough guy expects. Here's the career-ending truth about acting tough. It destroys your credibility faster than almost anything else you can do. Because credibility is built on predictability, reliability, and competence. But the tough guy is emotional, reactive, and focused on dominance rather than results. He's more concerned with winning interactions than achieving objectives. Watch what happens in professional settings. The manager who tries to lead through intimidation loses the respect of both his superiors and subordinates. His bosses see him as unstable and unpromotable. His employees see him as insecure and incompetent. Machiavelli says that leadership is about influence, not force. The best fortress which a prince can possess is the affection of the people. But the tough guy operates from the opposite philosophy: rule through fear and demand respect through aggression. And here's why this always backfires in modern organizations. Fear-based leadership creates surface compliance, but underground resistance. People do exactly what you tell them and nothing more. They follow orders but don't offer ideas. They obey but don't innovate. Meanwhile, your reputation spreads. The story of your explosive meeting becomes office legend. Your threatening email gets screenshotted and shared. Your aggressive behavior becomes the example of how not to act. And in professional environments, reputation is everything. In fact, reputation is everything for a man in any setting or environment. It determines who wants to work with you, who trusts you with important projects, who includes you in strategic discussions. It affects your promotions, your opportunities, your entire career trajectory. But the tough guy doesn't realize this until it's too late. He wonders why he keeps getting passed over for promotions despite his strong leadership style. He's confused about why people seem to avoid him in meetings. He doesn't understand why his ideas get dismissed even when they're good. Because here's what Machiavelli knew about power in organizations. It flows to those who can be trusted with it. Not those who demand it, but those who demonstrate they can handle it responsibly. The tough guy proves the opposite. Every emotional outburst demonstrates poor self-control. Every aggressive interaction proves unreliability. Every intimidating behavior shows he prioritizes ego over results. And there's something even worse than losing credibility. Once you're labeled as the difficult person, the hothead, or the problem employee, that reputation follows you. References get checked, networks get consulted, stories get shared. Your tough guy reputation becomes your career ceiling. And the worst part, the people who eventually surpass you are often the ones you dismissed as weak because they chose diplomacy over dominance, strategy over aggression, influence over intimidation. And it brings us to the most painful irony of all. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Machiavelli says that the performance of strength often masks the reality of weakness. And nowhere is this more obvious than with people who feel compelled to act tough. Because here's the psychological truth. Secure people don't need to prove their security. Confident people don't need to advertise their confidence. The same way you can spot a fake laugh, people can detect fake confidence. The same way you can feel when someone's trying too hard, others can feel your desperation to appear strong. Machiavelli called this the appearance of virtue without the substance, looking the part without being the part, performing the role without having the skills, projecting an image that your actual capacity can't support. And here's where this becomes truly dangerous. When you base your identity on a performance, you become a hostage to maintaining that performance. You can't show vulnerability without feeling like you're breaking character. You can't ask for help without feeling like you're admitting weakness. You can't back down without feeling like you're losing face. This creates what psychologists call the imposter trap. You're trapped playing a role that doesn't fit you, maintaining an image that exhausts you, living up to a reputation that limits you. Meanwhile, genuinely strong and confident people operate differently. They don't need to prove anything to anyone. They're comfortable showing vulnerability when appropriate. They ask for help when they need it. They back down when backing down serves their larger goals. This is what Machiavelli meant by the lion and the fox. A prince ought to be both a fox and a lion. The lion cannot defend himself against snares, and the fox cannot defend himself against wolves. But the tough guy only knows how to be the lion. All force, no finesse. All aggression, no strategy. All intimidation, no influence. And in a world that rewards adaptability, this inflexibility becomes a fatal weakness. The tough guy can't adjust his approach when aggression doesn't work. He can't switch tactics when intimidation fails. He can't pivot strategies when force proves counterproductive. So he escalates instead of adapting. He gets louder when he should get quieter. He gets more aggressive when he should get more strategic. He doubles down on what's not working instead of trying what might work. And this is exactly when the real predators strike, because they've been learning his patterns. They've been identifying his weaknesses, and they know exactly when and how to exploit them. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Machiavelli understood that people make decisions about you based on what they observe, not what you intend. And what they observe when you act tough isn't strength, it's instability. Here's what happens to people who consistently act tough. They gradually become isolated, not just socially, but professionally, emotionally, and strategically. Because here's what most people don't tell tough guys. They're exhausting to be around. Every conversation becomes a potential conflict. Every interaction requires emotional armor. Every relationship feels like a negotiation with a hostile party. Strong people, genuinely strong people, avoid this energy. They don't have time for emotional management. They don't want to walk on eggshells. They don't need the drama that comes with befriending someone who views every interaction as a test of dominance. So who sticks around the tough guy? Users, manipulators, the weak, the ones who benefit from his aggression, the ones who can redirect his anger toward their enemies. People who are weak but feel stronger by association with someone who appears strong. But none of these people are actually loyal. They're there for what they can get, not who you are. They'll abandon you the moment your toughness becomes a liability. They'll distance themselves when your reputation becomes toxic. Machiavelli warned about this. Men who can be useful to a prince are rare. Those who merely appear useful are common. The tough guy attracts people who appear useful but disappear when real loyalty is needed, when real support is required, when real friendship would make a difference. And the isolation gets worse over time because acting tough requires constant vigilance. You can't relax. You can't be vulnerable. You can't show doubt, fear, or uncertainty without feeling like you're breaking character. This creates what psychologists call emotional isolation. Even when you're surrounded by people, you're fundamentally alone because nobody knows the real you. They only know the performance. And this isolation has practical consequences. You don't get invited to the important conversations because people worry about your reaction. You don't get included in strategic planning because people can't predict your response. You don't get offered opportunities because people question your judgment. Meanwhile, the people you dismissed as weak are building networks. They're creating alliances. They're developing relationships. They're establishing trust with people who actually matter. Because here's what Machiavelli knew about real power. It's not about what you can do to people. It's about what people will do for you. It's not about who fears you. It's about who trusts you. It's not about who you can intimidate. It's about who you can influence. And influence requires relationship, which requires vulnerability, which requires authenticity, which requires dropping the tough guy act and allowing people to see who you actually are. But for many tough guys, this feels impossible. Because they've been performing strength for so long, they've forgotten what genuine strength feels like. They've been acting confident for so long, they've lost touch with real confidence. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. This is Machiavelli's most famous quote, and it's also his most misunderstood. People think it means you should be scary, aggressive, intimidating. But that's exactly wrong. Machiavelli wasn't talking about fear through aggression. He was talking about fear through competence. Not fear of your temper, but fear of your capabilities. Not fear of your anger, but fear of your consequences. There's a massive difference. When people fear your aggression, they either avoid you or plot against you. When people fear your competence, they respect you and want to work with you. Think about the people you genuinely respect. It's not the loudest person in the room. It's the person who speaks quietly, but everyone listens. It's the person who doesn't need to prove anything because their results speak for themselves. This is what Machiavelli called the appearance of necessity. When your value is so obvious that opposing you seems foolish. When your competence is so established that challenging you seems counterproductive. When your track record is so strong that betting against you seems unwise. But this kind of power takes time to build. It requires consistent performance rather than consistent performance of toughness. It demands actual results rather than theatrical displays. It needs genuine confidence rather than manufactured confidence. And here's the beautiful irony. The people who focus on being valuable become powerful. The people who focus on appearing powerful become vulnerable. Because real power is about options. When people need what you can provide, you have leverage. When people respect what you can accomplish, you have influence. When people trust your judgment, you have authority. None of this requires acting tough. In fact, acting tough actively prevents it, because tough guys focus on short-term dominance instead of long-term value. They prioritize immediate respect over lasting influence. They choose fear over trust. Machiavelli understood that sustainable power comes from being indispensable, not irreplaceable through intimidation, but irreplaceable through contribution. Not feared because you're dangerous, but feared because losing you would be costly. And this kind of power is actually more secure, because it's based on what you can do, not what you can threaten to do. It's grounded in your capabilities, not your willingness to escalate. It's built on your value, not your volatility, which means you can drop the tough guy act without losing power. In fact, dropping the act often increases your power, because now people can actually work with you. They can trust you. They can rely on you. And this leads to the ultimate Machiavellian insight. The wise man does at once what the fool does last. The fool acts tough until he's forced to be strategic. The wise man is strategic from the beginning, which makes acting tough unnecessary. Here's what changes when you stop performing strength and start developing it. You become more influential, not less. More respected, not less. More powerful, not less. Because real strength doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in your decisions. It appears in your consistency. It manifests in your results. People feel genuine strength the way they feel genuine confidence. Not because you tell them about it, but because they experience it in interaction with you. Not because you prove it through aggression, but because you demonstrate it through confidence. And here's what Machiavelli knew about lasting power. It's never about the lion or the fox. It's about knowing when to be which. Sometimes you need to be direct and forceful. Sometimes you need to be subtle and strategic. But the tough guy only has one tool: aggression. So every problem looks like something that needs to be intimidated. Every challenge seems like something that needs to be dominated. Every relationship feels like something that needs to be controlled. The strategically minded person has many tools: influence when appropriate, force when necessary, diplomacy when useful, pressure when effective. This flexibility is what makes them genuinely dangerous. Not because they're aggressive, but because they're unpredictable. Not because they're loud, but because they're calculating. Not because they threaten, but because they deliver. And here's the ultimate irony. The people who stop trying to look tough often become the most formidable because they've learned to be strategic instead of reactive, purposeful instead of emotional, effective instead of dramatic. They've learned Machiavelli's greatest lesson, that power is a game of chess, not a boxing match. That influence is about moving pieces, not throwing punches. That real strength is about achieving objectives, not winning confrontations. So maybe the question isn't, how can I look stronger? Maybe it's, how can I become more valuable? Maybe it's, how can I develop genuine confidence? Maybe it's, how can I build real influence? The smartest thing you can do isn't learning to act tougher. It's learning to be more strategic, more competent, more valuable, more indispensable. Because when you become someone people need rather than someone people fear, when you become someone people respect rather than someone people avoid, when you become someone people trust rather than someone people tolerate, that's when you discover what real power feels like. And it doesn't require acting tough at all. In fact, it requires the opposite: the confidence to be authentic, the strength to be vulnerable when appropriate, and the wisdom to know that the most powerful people in any room are usually the quietest. Machiavelli said this 500 years ago. The question is, how long will it take you to learn what he already knew? If this perspective changes how you think about strength and power, let me know in the comments. Which insight hit you hardest? And if you know someone who's trapped in the tough guy act, share this with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is help someone discover they don't need to perform strength to have it.